and welcome once more. At this point, it would be remiss of me not to express sincere and heartfelt thanks to Tony Lambert, without whose expertise and generosity these videos would not be possible. I am a complete novice at this type of thing, and consider myself extremely lucky to have this opportunity to avail myself of Tony's skill and professionalism. I can only recommend his dedication to craft to anyone else who is fortunate enough to be able to work with him at Secret Harbour sessions. There is a wealth of information and links available at that website. Check it out, it's absolutely worthwhile. Last time we covered the notice concerning coercion to aid and abet treason and misprision of treason. This time we're on to the final of the 5 notices, which, like the previous 3, are the same whether or not the recipients have made demands on us. From that we can deduce that the purposes of the notices are twofold. 1, they are designed to repel unlawful demands by people who have no legitimate authority, a concept to which we will return later in this talk. And 2, to inform our oppressors that we are aware of their criminality and let them know firmly the consequences for their unlawful behaviour at their trial before a jury of the people at a later date. This final notice, which we now examine, has the usual address and date protocols in opening. There follows a firm reiteration of the facts concerning the invocation of Article 61 and a statement of the absolute responsibility of all citizens to conform to the law, which in the case of the recipient means to stop all further unlawful actions against the sender. Warnings are given that to continue is an act of treason, which may be lawfully resisted by force if necessary, including the personal arrest of the offenders as acts of self-defence and defence of the realm. Underlining this last section is the Latin maxim, actus me in vito factus, non est meus actus. An act done by me against my will is not my act. This means that although our dissent is lawful and peaceful, as demanded by Article 61 itself, if we are compelled by the unlawful aggression of others to break that commitment and resort to force to defend ourselves and the nation against treason, we are lawfully excused to do so. Likewise, if we are forcibly compelled to comply with some unlawful demand, such as by the threat of imprisonment if we do not comply with a fine or other imposed condition, we are entitled to select which of these obnoxious options will do us the least harm, under the claim vico actus, which means under duress. Those committing such offences are warned that they may later expect to be tried for these, for example in a tort action. After the standard signing and witnessing, there is a re-presentation of the 3 exhibits pertaining to the invocation of Article 61, namely the press report, the Baron's petition to the Queen and her inadequate response, and finally the full text of Article 61 itself. This is so that the recipient can be in no doubt of the lawfulness of our processes. Normally this ends the correspondence between us and the offenders, though of course, like any other criminals, until actually arrested, they always have the option of committing further offences or crimes against us. Should they do so, they are obviously gambling on the premise that we will not make good on our threats of further action or forceful defence of our person or freedoms. We need to consider the implications of these veiled options, which brings us to the point mentioned earlier about the lack of legitimate authority of those currently claiming the right to rule over us. Let's consider 2 statements here. One by Winston Churchill. There is a law which sits above even kings and parliaments. 2 by one of the most important and influential writers of the past century, George Orwell. Tyranny is always imposed by fraud and force. Once the fraud is exposed, the only remaining option is force. It's vital that we realise that by informing people of the existence and exercise of Article 61, we are exposing the fraud of our current government institutions. Initially, David Robinson had 100% success in getting those alleged Crown agents harassing him and his associates to desist. In one case, the UK Tax Office not only withdrew their claim against someone for hundreds of pounds of unpaid tax, but even refunded a sizable sum that had been paid under a previous unlawful demand. In another case, however, a man using the process to protest paying council tax was dragooned into a video court and prevented from having David Robinson act as his advocate. This man was threatened with several weeks of imprisonment if he didn't pay up. Although this treatment was unlawful, paying the tax was considered by the victim as less damaging than going to jail, so he paid vico actus under duress. Why did the system pursue this course against this man? Because if he had been allowed to win, it might have opened the floodgates to the denial of a very important source of revenue to the criminal regime masquerading as government. We might ask, what would have happened if he had opted for 25 days jail and several million others had also done the same? The lawlessness of the government would have been fully exposed to public view, and the government would have had to consider whether they were going to jail several million people every time this tax was levied, when everyone in the country knew the true lawful situation. How stable would the government's position have remained? It's a hypothetical question, but it illustrates that the stakes are high, the highest possible. We are talking about our own freedom and the freedom of our succeeding generations. At a recent informal meeting, I heard several people lamenting the fact that the recently elected, inverted commas, Australian government had moved even further in the direction of greater government control over people's lives than before. Some expressed a real fear about the government either joining some treaty giving autonomy over health regulations and management of pandemics to the WHO, and or ramming through a move to declare Australia a republic, and thereby removing the last remaining avenue to remedy against tyranny. When asked what they had learned from the election, most said that it was that tampering with such things was now openly obvious. When asked if a constitutional referendum about becoming a republic or handing over sovereignty to an unelected body like the UN or the WHO would have any more validity, the general reaction was, "No, but what can we do?" My answer was, you can get into lawful standing under Article 61 and push back with the force of law on your side. Is that not preferable to wailing and bemoaning our fate? Once we have taken that step, we're still free to pursue other avenues of redress. But we have that security clause to which we can always resort when oppressed directly. It is imperative that each person learn their rights and the constitutional base upon which they are predicated. Currently, there is a group of corrupt individuals who were allegedly elected to serve us, who are instead claiming completely falsely that they have the right to rule over us, and that we should be grateful if they allow us to exercise whichever of our inalienable rights they deem fit to dole out. We have been provided with a means to combat this criminality, which works when people unite to pick up the sword and shield that is the law and use it. But we must always be aware that criminals do not possess good natures to which we can appeal. They are criminals because they have abandoned the concept of having a good nature. Eventually, we must be prepared, if called upon, to put everything on the line, as did our forebears, in defence of our freedom. There's no evading the fact that despots and tyrants want total control, that such types have always existed, and that just as the general population has increased, so has the number of such undesirables in our midst. The questions everyone must answer for themselves are: am I one of those on whom my children and dependents can rely to stand up for them? Or am I one of those who are content to leave it to someone, anyone else, to fund and display that kind of courage? Is it appropriate any longer to maintain the so-called traditional Aussie response of "she'll be right"? There is no sidestepping the issue of our integrity, which means wholeness of being. Our actions must align with our consciences, that which we know to be right. I can assure everyone that those who assign themselves into that second group, the wait-and-seers, will not find contentment therein. The day will come when they will look in the mirror, either a glass one or the mirror of their soul, and rue the day that they failed to stand. Stand up now. It's later than we think. Thank you for watching.